All right, let's jump right into this explainer. We're looking at how climate change is literally redrawing the map of global power, taking the Arctic, a place historically seen as just an impenetrable frozen wasteland, and turning it into the world's most fiercely contested geopolitical arena. For centuries, the top of our world was, well, pretty much ignored by global strategy. But today, the ice is fracturing, and as it melts, it's revealing an absolute treasure trove of resources and new shipping lanes that are changing everything. So here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with 1, the new Arctic frontier, and 2, why the Arctic matters. Then we'll dive into 3, the geopolitical cold rush, before pivoting to a really surprising twist, 4, India's Arctic ambitions, and finally, 5, India's strategic footprint. Okay, part 1, the new Arctic frontier. Let's look at the exact spark that just abruptly cracked open the top of the world. The Arctic Ocean is totally unique because it's ringed by exactly 8 nations: Canada, Russia, Greenland, Norway, Sweden, Finland, Iceland, and the US. Now, for almost all of human history, because of extreme solar radiation patterns and crazy thick year-round ice, this area was basically a closed vault. Normal ships couldn't get through, commercial exploration was a total no-go. But recently, drastic climate shifts have completely flipped the script, turning this locked vault into a highly accessible frontier. And here is the absolutely crucial takeaway. The Arctic is warming at nearly twice the global average. Twice! I mean, while the rest of the world is debating these tiny fractional degree changes, the Arctic is in a state of runaway warming. This rapid melting is drastically increasing the region's accessibility for major geoeconomic interests, basically dissolving the natural barriers that kept superpowers out for centuries. Moving on to part 2, why the Arctic matters. Because honestly, to understand the crazy politics up there, you really have to understand the prize. And this brings us to the ultimate paradox of the modern Arctic. On one hand, you have staggering economic potential. We're talking vast untapped resources, huge commercial fishing zones, and brand new open water shipping lanes that will massively slash global travel times. But on the exact opposite side, the melting ice that unlocks all that commercial wealth is actively threatening a highly fragile ecosystem, an ecosystem that, by the way, literally regulates the temperature for our entire planet. To get a real sense of the massive economic magnet pulling nations north, consider this wild stat. The Arctic holds an estimated 1/5 of the entire world's undiscovered oil and gas. 1/5, just sitting under the ice. And it's not just fossil fuels. The region is packed with gold, silver, platinum, iron, zinc, copper, even methane hydrates. It's essentially a literal gold mine just waiting to be tapped. But we absolutely have to weigh that massive wealth against the region's ecological anchors. First, there's the albedo effect. Basically, the Arctic sea ice acts like a giant white mirror, bouncing the sun's rays back into space and keeping Earth cool. Then you have the thermohaling circulation, which is the global conveyor belt for our ocean currents. Add in the permafrost, a massive carbon sink, and the fact that this place is home to over 21,000 cold-adapted species. If we degrade these anchors, we are looking at devastating global consequences, like rising sea levels, extreme weather, and the total collapse of marine life. Which brings us to part 3, the geopolitical cold rush. With so much treasure and so much global risk exposed at exactly the same time, a scramble for dominance was basically guaranteed. Think about it. The geographic distance between the US and Russia across the Arctic is surprisingly short. Because of that, we're seeing this intense escalating standoff. We're talking ICBM systems, nuclear-powered attack subs, and heavily fortified naval bases. But hey, it's not just a two-player game anymore. China has actually unveiled what they call a polar Silk Road, making a very subtle but very strategic creep into the region. They're securing their presence through partnerships, like Russia's Yamal liquefied natural gas project. And as you can guess, this expansion is seriously shaking up the traditional power dynamics. Section 4, India's Arctic ambitions. Right in the middle of these traditional superpowers, a totally unexpected player has quietly entered the great game. This brings up a really fascinating question that you're probably wondering right now. What possible interest does India, a notoriously warm tropical nation, have in a freezing ocean thousands of miles away? Well, the answer boils down to strict survival and economic growth. Let's unpack their core motivations. Number 1, climate. It turns out Arctic warming directly dictates the behavior of the Indian monsoon. And since the monsoon is basically the lifeblood of India's agriculture, melting Arctic ice directly impacts India's water security and coastal erosion. Number 2 is resource and energy security. A booming manufacturing sector needs fuel, right? That's exactly why India's ONGC Videsh has grabbed stakes in Russia's Rosneft new Arctic oil project. And finally, navigation. India's actively building a connectivity corridor, specifically the Chennai-Vladivostok maritime route, to link straight into these resource-rich Arctic zones.
Which leads us to part 5, India's strategic footprint. Because New Delhi isn't just watching the ice melt from the sidelines, they are taking deliberate, direct action.
They've actually laid out a super precise master plan. India's draft Arctic policy rests on 5 main pillars. You've got science and research, economic and human development cooperation, transportation and connectivity, engaging in governance and international cooperation, and finally, national capacity building. And to make sure this doesn't just collect dust on a desk, the whole thing will be driven by an action plan and tightly monitored by an empowered Arctic policy group. And this master plan translates to a very real physical footprint. It's actually kind of wild. The main hub for India's polar research, the NCPOR, is located in the tropical coastal state of Goa. But their reach goes all the way up north. They've built an underground observatory called Indark, parked right in the Kongsfjorden Fjord, halfway between Norway and the North Pole. Plus, they run their first dedicated Arctic research station named Himadri all the way up in Svalbard, Norway. They are physically up there, gathering the crucial data they need to survive. So to wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with one final thought. We used to think of the Arctic as this isolated zone that only belonged to the countries right next to it. But as climate change literally erases the ice and connects the Indian monsoon directly to Arctic permafrost, that old geopolitical map is completely obsolete. Think about it. If a tropical nation's survival depends on what happens at the North Pole, how will the world govern a frontier that now undeniably affects us all? Thanks for joining me today, and keep questioning the changing world around you.